these other conversations with world leaders, and they have not reacted well, obviously, when Biden has called him those names: pure thug, a ruthless dictator,
a war criminal,
and now calling for regime change.
Major developments indeed. President of the United States, I think it's fair to say, not mincing any words at all in blasting Putin, the leader of Russia. To our viewers, thanks very much for joining us. I'm Wolf Blitzer here in Warsaw, Poland. I'll be back later today, a special edition of the Situation Room, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. CNN Newsroom continues right now with my good friend Jim Acosta. Stay with us.
This is CNN Breaking News.
You are live in the CNN Newsroom. I'm Jim Acosta in Washington, and we are following major breaking news this hour. President Biden in Poland moments ago in a flamethrower of a speech declaring that Russian President Vladimir Putin should no longer be the leader of his country, as he warned Putin against moving an inch onto NATO territory. Russian missiles are striking Lviv, Ukraine, just an hour's drive away from NATO territory. Let's begin with CNN's John Berman, who is in Lviv, Ukraine, for us. John, this caught everybody by surprise. I know where you are, because things have been relatively quiet in Lviv when you compare it to the rest of the country. And on the same day that President Biden is giving this fiery speech in Poland, what more are you learning about what's happening on your end?
Yeah, it was interesting. President Biden in his speech warned Russia not to touch 1 inch of NATO territory. Well, he didn't. But he got pretty close, right? I'm about an hour's drive from the Polish border, which is NATO territory. And today, Russia carried out a series of airstrikes on this city, Lviv, in western Ukraine. You're looking at pictures now. That was a fuel, I should say, storage facility that was hit, and I believe is still ablaze as we head into the night. There were 3 explosions before that was set on fire. And then about an hour and a half later, we heard a new series of explosions. And just a short time ago, a statement from the mayor of Lviv did confirm that there was a hit on infrastructure in this city, a hit on infrastructure. He said firefighters are working out to put out the fires there. But he did also add there were no strikes on residential areas. Can you hear that? That's an air raid siren again. We haven't heard an air raid siren since the one that came shortly before we heard the blast that ended up being the strikes on that fuel storage facility. But once again, we are hearing air raid sirens in this city. It had been relatively quiet here for days, Jim. But what's notable, again, is the location of Lviv. It's in the far western part of the country. This is a city of some 800,000 people. This has been a transit hub for millions of Ukrainians as they try to get out of this country safely. So the population here has swelled. People consider themselves relatively safe here. They were out on the streets today en masse, shopping, eating. I saw a wedding party getting photographed today just a couple hours before what you're looking at there, the airstrike on that fuel storage facility, the smoke rising from it before the sun set. Firefighters were on the scene working feverishly to put out the blaze. And again, this came just a short time before President Biden gave his speech in Warsaw, just over the border, saying to Vladimir Putin, don't dare touch an inch of NATO territory. The president also hearkened back to history. And I think one thing I want to point out is history is not the past for the people of Ukraine. Not at all. You don't have to go far to find a Ukrainian whose grandmother was in the Gulag because of Stalin, for instance. I literally was speaking to someone today who told us their grandmother was in the Gulag. You don't have to go far to find people who lost friends in battles over the last few years. They've been at war in their minds with Russia since 2014, since Maidan, and since the fighting in the West. So history is very much a part of their lives. And so when President Biden makes reference to that, it's something that people here, I think, feel very acutely, Jim.
Absolutely. John Berman, we can hear those air raid sirens behind you. Please stay safe and keep us posted if anything develops on your end. Could be a busy night there in Lviv. John Berman, thank you very much. And let's go now to CNN's Phil Mattingly in Warsaw, Poland, where President Biden just wrapped up a major speech. Phil, this was, as I was saying a few moments ago, a flamethrower of a speech directed at Vladimir Putin, telling the Russian leader not to touch 1 inch of NATO territory, and saying that he can no longer remain in power, or he should no longer remain in power. I'm curious, John, Phil, you know, sometimes the administration is careful about saying whether or not they're talking about regime change. Is the White House saying that President Biden is indeed talking about regime change, or is that something perhaps that you guys are trying to track down at this moment? What's the latest?
Still trying to track that down right now. I'm not totally sure that was planned based on how the remarks actually played out, but I also think it underscores the view that the president has long had of Vladimir Putin that has only hardened, grown darker, grown more caustic over the course of the last several weeks. Look, Jim, you know this very well. Oftentimes, people try and set expectations in advance of a speech, and the White House set the expectations very high. And it seems, in the wake of the speech, that the president delivered on that. A lengthy speech, probably a speech that will long be remembered in his administration in terms of its ability to tie this moment to history, the parallels to communism, to the Soviet Union, to the Berlin Wall, to the Iron Curtain, and the importance of not just Eastern Europe, not just Europe writ large, but of Poland, where we are right now in Warsaw, to that moment, to that struggle, to that fight, and how that ties to the fight that the U.S., Europe finds itself watching happening in Ukraine and participating in to some degree from the outside. But the president also making clear that Poland is a NATO ally, the NATO alliance in general, which I think has been reinvigorated by what we've seen over the course of the last month, stands critical. Take a listen.
Yesterday, I met with the troops that are serving alongside our Polish allies to bolster NATO's frontline defenses. The reason we wanted to make clear is their movement on Ukraine don't even think about moving on 1 single inch of NATO territory. We have sacred obligation. We have a sacred obligation under Article 5 to defend each and every inch of NATO territory with the full force of our collective power.
Jim, it was an unequivocal message, and just one of many unequivocal messages in terms of the U.S.'s willingness to stand by Ukraine throughout this, stand by Eastern Europe and Europe overall throughout this, but also a very clear call to European leaders, to the leaders of Western democracies, about the stakes of this moment, the urgency of this moment, and the necessity to do more than just say the right things, that this is going to take time, it's going to take work, it's likely going to cause pain in everybody's domestic economies. We've seen it play out over the course of the last month. But it is an absolute necessity given the challenge of this time. And I think it's a challenge that has become so vivid, so visceral to some degree, and so acute over the course of the last month. And that, more than anything else, was what the president wanted to convey in these remarks. But no question about it, the president saying explicitly that Vladimir Putin should no longer be in power. That's the headline. That is new, and that's very significant, Jim.
No question about it, Phil Mattingly, and I'm sure White House reporters are going to be, peppering the traveling press aides who are going to be on this trip for some more answers on all of this, as I know you'll be doing that as well. Phil Mattingly, thank you very much. And joining me now, retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Peter Swack, a former senior U.S. defense attaché to Russia, and Larry Diamond, director of the Center of Democracy Development and Rule of Law at Stanford. He's the author of Ill Winds: Saving Democracy from Russian Rage, Chinese Ambition, and American Complacency. Larry, thanks so much for being with us. General, thanks so much for being with us. Larry, let me ask you first about the president's speech a few moments ago. How significant do you think it is that President Biden said that Vladimir Putin could no longer remain in power, should no longer remain in power? Is that remark a game changer? We know a few moments ago, Dmitry Peskov, a spokesman for Vladimir Putin, said that's for the Russian people to decide, not an American president. Of course, they don't exactly have free and fair elections in Russia.
Well, I don't think it's a game changer, Jim, because we don't have the power on our own to bring about a change of leadership in Russia. But I think that the speech overall is a game changer in its Churchillian call for democratic resolve among the entire NATO and, by extension, really global democratic alliance. And he reminded Americans at a time when I think they need to be reminded, after a period of complacency after all these wars, that every generation has had to defeat democracy's moral foes. Those were his words. And every generation is called upon to rise out of its apathy and its absorption with its own affairs and realize that we remain in an existential struggle against tyranny, and now we are again. And I think he is exposing the stakes here for the American people and the NATO alliance.
And General Zwack, Biden, the president, also reiterated the idea that Putin made a critical error, thinking the West and NATO would not be unified. We heard during the speech that, you know, the president was essentially shaping this up as a struggle between democracy and autocracy. He's done that on many occasions. Strategically, I guess, how important has this trip and how important was that speech to Biden and his strategy of rallying NATO around this cause of standing with Ukraine and standing up to Putin?
Jim, it was strategic. I think it was a really, the speech was really, really well done, and it touched on several strategic points. Number one, it framed for Europe and the greater like-minded world how we are not afraid. And basically was a rallying call, is a rallying call that has been shown by deeds and not just words in certainly the last 6-8 weeks. This was galvanizing, unifying for NATO. Here's another strategic point. He reached out to the Russian people in language that would be visceral for them. He invoked the memories of the Nazi invasion of Barbarossa, the siege of Leningrad, and the fact that the Russians, the Soviets, the Russians suffered hugely, and then transferred that into a visualization of the horrors happening in Ukraine today, telling the Russians, because for the Russians, a lot of the narrative, the justification of this is going back and twisting the narrative of World War II and giving them the justification when I was in Russia often, you know, going out to the cemeteries and the ceremonies for the Great Patriotic War is deep to them. And I think President Biden was able to turn that around while also reaching out to the Russian people who, the older ones, the grandparents, the babushka, World War II, and these horrors are not just history, they are in memory. And he mentioned that as well. A very, very well executed speech, passionate.
And I see you nodding there, Larry, if you want to chime in on that. I mean, you heard the president there saying a few moments ago that the Russian people are not the enemy of the American people. He was really trying to drive a wedge, the president was, between Putin and the people of Russia.
That's right, Jim. General Zwack would know better than most because he's served in Russia as our most senior military representative, and not that long ago. So he's acutely aware of this. And many of us who've been there and engaged Russians know that there is, it may not be a majority, but a strong, younger, forward-looking liberal element that's simply appalled by this. And even one of the more extended oligarchical, wealthy supporters of Putin over the last 2 decades, Anatoly Chubais, has now defected. And I think we need to try to promote more defections and cracks in his ranks. But most of all, Jim, we need a much more sophisticated information campaign to try directly to reach the Russian people in innovative ways, on their mobile phones, through their messaging, in a variety of ways that we haven't really tried before, that push out the envelope to try to bring to them the truth about what their country is doing in Ukraine and how pointless and destructive it is, not only to the 44 million people of Ukraine, but to the more than 150 million people of Russia.
Yeah, General, how about that? I mean, how important is that going to be? I mean, you worked inside Russia. You know many of your counterparts and had good relations with them, professional relations with them during your time as an attaché. How do we get this message, or how does the U.S. Communicate this message directly to the Russian people and get around what the president was really talking about during parts of his speech, that Putin has this propaganda blockade essentially in effect, where the Russians are, as a matter of public policy, trying to keep out anything that flies in the face of the party line, the Kremlin line. How does the rest of the world do that? How do they get around that?
I think that again, there are two strategic. There's a operational front, which is the horrific fight for Ukraine, and that is, as we talked earlier, the longer the Ukrainians hold out, they are putting extreme pressure on what may be the decisive front, and that is the hearts and minds and perceptions of the Russian people. I believe that the Russians see the world, or paint the world, through a prism of existential threats. There are real ones they've had in their long history, including the Mongols and the Nazis. Existential, perceived threats, and all the perceived threats of what you see in NATO, and then the what I call contrived threats, which is what this regime does. It filters and builds on these perceived threats, paints NATO and the United States as the equivalent of modern day fascist, with Ukraine as an agent, and breaking through that firewall is the decisive battle. Because my experience on the ground, and I've been in and out of there for 33 years, I've been to a lot of these memorials and have gone to a lot of the battlefields, is the Russians are not endlessly enduring and compliant. They desperately want to believe their nation's narrative. They desperately want to believe Putin. But I think that it's getting through. It's going to shake them, and eventually, and we see it already in these tremors in the military and their security forces, and thousands of people being arrested. This is just the beginning of a strategic, geostrategic phenomena that may actually take not as long as we think, if I may throw it. So the Colossus has closed.
Fascinating. All right. Well, excellent analysis from both of you. General Zwack, Larry Diamond, thank you very much. We'll see what the reaction is. I'm guessing there's going to be more reaction coming out of Moscow to the president's speech. We appreciate both of you joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Much more on our breaking news coverage. Russian missiles striking Lviv as President Biden visits neighboring Poland. Don't go anywhere. We'll have more on all of this, and we'll be right back.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal al-Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down for cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
The Breitling Navitimer was first introduced in 1952, and it is right up there among the most legendary aviation watches. It features a bezel with a logarithmic, double-rotating slide rule scale, and this slide rule can do a lot. With a quick glance at the wrist, it can indicate fuel consumption, climbing and sinking speeds, as well as average speeds. This is the brand of many dashboard clocks used in cockpits, from models as famous as the Boeing 707. This watch has some very famous fans, including a pilot and movie star John Travolta. Not only does Travolta wear a Breitling Navitimer, his own dashboard instruments are also Breitling. So this is a watch with incredible credibility in the air, as well as having a very useful look on the wrist.
Today we live in an unpredictable environment and news races around the world at breakneck speed.
Our engine continues, our impetus, our momentum.
My show brings you the latest news and top news makers. Give me the facts on voter fraud.
There has never been a moment where voter fraud has affected the outcome of an election.
And we also dive below the headlines to explore vital issues impacting our lives.
Normally this theatre would be filled with people and art and debate and energy, and so now we have to rely on the two of us.
How interesting is it to be Tyler Mitchell today? It's crucial we make sense of what's happening. There seems to be some confusion that maybe you can clear up. Where are the US forces in Syria going? And fully understand what's at stake.
What's happening now in the world is a great thing because people are talking about subjects they never did before.
Amanpour, weeknights on CNN.
I'm Julia Chatterley. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
First Move with Julia Chatterley, weekdays on CNN.
Back now to our breaking news in Lviv in western Ukraine, where a fuel storage facility was hit by Russian missiles today while President Biden was just across the border in Poland. I'm joined now by CNN's Don Lemon and John Berman. They're both on the ground in Lviv. And join me now. Don, you were there just a short while ago, and I suppose had to hustle out of there because of the risk to just being in that area. And John, I know you've been there for several days now, and I know you can both speak to the fact that this is just unusual to see this level of activity in that part of Ukraine. I know we've seen some here and there, but Don, to you first, your thoughts on what you saw there on the scene.
Well, I mean, we were both here. John was actually on the air, and I think you were on with a general when the air raid sirens, Wesley Clark, am I correct?
We're all with Wes Clark. We hear the air raid sirens going off.
Yeah, and I'm, I looked to see what was happening, and then we went downstairs and rushed to the scene, got there as quickly as possible. John and I talked about this earlier. I was surprised at how close this actually is to the center of town. It's, in Lviv itself, not in the city center proper. But I was thinking it was going to take us a while to get there because if the shots that we had here, it looks like it was further in the distance, and they said that there was a valley before we got there. But lo and behold, we got in the car and we were there within 10 minutes, maybe, if that, and that is with traffic. So we got there was a residential neighborhood. There were people leaving the neighborhood, emergency workers trying to get people out. And there were obviously a number of different emergency personnel on the scene, firefighters, ambulances, police officers, military folks as well, directing traffic. And so we went through and they directed us to a place where we could go. And then we came up on this place. But when we got there, John, the concern was one of the tanks, it was close to one of the tanks, and they thought that it might actually catch fire and blow as well. So they kept pushing us back and pushing us back. And Jim, you're right. They pushed us back for safety and also in case there was another strike.
Which there was. People should know that after this, and you're looking at this fuel storage facility on fire there, after this, about an hour, hour and a half after, we heard a series of additional explosions. And the mayor of Lviv put out a statement that said some kind of additional infrastructure facility was hit. He didn't say what, but he said that firefighters are working to put that out as well. What he did say is that there were no residential areas hit in the second round of the airstrikes.
Well, I mean, but look at that, John. I saw the pictures on the air for a short while before we left. And when I got there, I was just surprised at just the enormity of this fire, just how big it is, and the smell, there's plumes and plumes of black smoke, and then that just big roaring orange fire, and you could smell the gas burning. I talked to one of the firefighters on the scene and asked him what it was through the interpreter, and he said it's diesel. It was diesel that was burning. So it was pretty darn scary. And, in these situations, you don't know. Why are they targeting Lviv, of all places?
Well, they're targeting fuel facilities because it's the logistics. It's the logistics of the military effort here, of the Ukrainians who've been fighting back, in some cases very successfully, against the Russian forces there. You can see the precision that the Russians are capable of when they want to here, because you were a block away from houses and residences.
Well, we were there. The houses were right there.
Right there.
We were maybe 2 football fields away from this, 3 football fields away from the actual fire. And there were, at first, from the distance, it looked like they were donning hazmat suits, but those are sort of heat shield suits, so they can get close to the fire without being burned. Those big silver bubble space-looking suits that they have. But I mean, a couple of times you saw live on the air, John was talking to you, and they were, the firefighters were being moved back. The fire was pushing them back, and they lost control of the hose at one point. So it's a dangerous situation. I can still smell the smoke on my clothing and in my nostrils. So,
Just a little bit more of the context here. Again, this is one of the westernmost cities in Ukraine, certainly the biggest western city here, and this has been a transit point for many of the millions of Ukrainian refugees who are fleeing the country. It's normally a city of about 800,000 people, well more than that now. So it's scary for the people who have fled the other parts of the country to be here now, only to hear the explosions. And actually, I think we're going to play the explosions here for you so you can hear them. You're not going to see anything, but listen closely, and you're going to hear 3 blasts. Here we go.
Wow.
So that is what we heard.
And I was in the room.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, the wind is really going out there. But it was right after the air sirens went on.
And I do think it is fair to ask, Don, given that President Biden was due to speak just over the border, it's only an hour drive to the Polish border from here, the timing before the president's speech, and everyone knows this is where the Western media is. Yeah. Everyone knows that if something gets set on fire in Lviv, the pictures are going to get around the world. If somehow this was some kind of message, I don't know if it was a message of strength from Vladimir Putin, but a message
of desperation.
Maybe.
And one of terror and of fear. I mean, that is also a tactic, as we both know, of war, is to terrorize people and to scare them. Could it be to send a message to the West, to send a message to the President of the United States and to NATO? Possibly. But, we don't know at this point, and who knows what Vladimir Putin is thinking. And it's also the timing of this, as you said, the president at the Polish border, but also when the Russian officials said yesterday, we are going to scale back the first phase of this mission, we've accomplished it. We know that is rhetoric, that's BS. And then to move into this, because this is nowhere near the Donbass area, right? We couldn't be further away in this country, in a major city. And so this does not appear to be a pulling back or a change in strategy from this mission. This appears to be either desperation, just to show strength, or to terrorize.
I'm glad you're back safely from the site where those missiles struck. There's a lot more to come. This is CNN's special live coverage. More right after this.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action.
region's post-pandemic, or mid-pandemic, I should say, performance is, as you go across the 20 or so countries that make up the Middle East and North Africa, is as diverse as the 500 million people or so that live in it. We've been saying for a long time that the only way we can address, as a sort of silver bullet, the youth unemployment crisis and socioeconomic problems that we have and challenges we have across the region is by nurturing small businesses to create jobs, create opportunities, and pursue innovation. The problem is no one was investing in small businesses, but I see that changing. We need to create businesses as change agents who can in turn create the solutions both on a social and economic objective. One of the other trends we're seeing is where businesses are aligning with their social and environmental impact in addition to their, of course, financial impact as being one and the same in terms of stakeholder returns. So that, I think, is a positive trend we have to nurture.
Business is all about making connections. But some connections are easier to make than others. With a CNN partner hotel, the world is always at your fingertips. CNN partner hotels, connected to your world.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. Real news that shapes our world. Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. It all starts here. And that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
I'm Natasha Bertrand at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and this is CNN.
Back now to our breaking news in Lviv, Ukraine, where a fuel storage facility was hit by Russian missiles today, not far from where President Biden was, just across the border in Poland. Artist and activist Diana Berg is with me now. She escaped the devastation in Mariupol, which has just been atrocious and has shocked the world. I guess, Diana, thank you so much for joining. I wanted to get your quick reaction to what you heard from President Biden. I don't know if you watched the speech, but from your perspective, was it good to hear the American president in neighboring Poland, I guess, issuing those kinds of warnings to Vladimir Putin? What were your thoughts?
I think it wasn't only me who heard the speech of Biden, but I think that those missiles, these explosions, these rockets that headed to Lviv directly here a couple of hours ago, that was probably one of the saying hi, greetings to Biden's visit to Europe and Poland. So I think that everyone is watching what's happening, and we really appreciate how President Biden is showing his concern about Ukraine and actually support. But unfortunately, no matter how much you do to support Ukraine, whether it's helping with humanitarian aid, whether it's taking escapees and refugees, or providing with military help, it's never enough when it comes to war with Russia. So we are very grateful to US and to all the international partners, but sorry, it's not enough. When it comes to Russia, there is no such thing as enough. And just recent rockets or missiles just proved it.
And Diana, I know you escaped Mariupol. You still have some friends who are there. For our viewers, who see the pictures, and we're showing some of the pictures now, it's absolutely heartbreaking what has happened to that city. Tell us what life has been like in Mariupol, and how are your friends doing there? Are you even able to speak with them?
The thing is that the most devastating thing is not only how Russia is exterminating the city to the ground and how people have to survive there in that ruins, but it's total informational blockade. So if you can contact someone from Mariupol, if you see that they are online after 1 month of being offline, it only means that they just escaped. There is unfortunately no way to chat or talk to, almost zero possibility to talk with people in Mariupol. But thanks God, people during last week, they managed to escape. Not much, not many of them, only up to, I think, up to less than 100 people, and around 200,000 people, are still staying there. And the good news is that our friends and close ones managed to do that, to escape. And just today our dear friend and very close colleague, Alexei, just came today. And I hope he will be able to talk soon. But this month in Mariupol, in this blockade, in this besieged city, was a very shocking experience that no one is ready to. He's kind of a most fresh, if I can say so, source of information about what is there. And it's what I hear is just shocking. He saw just bodies lying, with bodies without legs or without parts. He was, there were 14 of them hiding in a basement for 3 weeks. They were sharing one dish like for 2 weeks. It's a potato soup because they managed to get some potatoes. They had to take risks and go to the spring to get some water. It was very cold. He didn't change his clothes for 3 weeks. And it was constantly, brutally bombed and shelled. And the center where he was staying, and then they walked by feet to Mangush. It's a village 50 kilometers under the shelling and missiles and airstrikes and mines. And I think he really needs some moment to take some breath. But unfortunately, there are still people left behind, and it's the biggest quest of our life to coordinate, to organize the evacuation of civilians who are being destroyed.
Well, Diana Berg, we appreciate you coming on and sharing that story with us. Our hearts go to you and all of your friends who are still there in Mariupol. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And stay with us. We are continuing to monitor the breaking news in Lviv and the rest of Ukraine. Russian strikes hitting Lviv earlier today as President Biden was visiting neighboring Poland. Don't go anywhere. We'll have more in just a few moments.
In a special ongoing season of the Tug of War podcast, CNN reporters are on the ground in Ukraine, documenting Russia's invasion, the escalating conflict, and what it means for the rest of the world. Tug of War. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. I'm excited to let you know that my digital show Full Circle is back. You can watch every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, 6 p.m. live Eastern Time or anytime on demand. And to make sure you never miss a show, you can get alerts on every episode via the CNN app. I'll see you then.
I'm Barry Hurst, Energy and Sustainability Director at Schneider Electric. Schneider Electric was ranked the world's most sustainable company in 2021 by Corporate Knights, and it drew a lot of attention to what we've been working on now for over 10 years. So I think the important thing to emphasize is that it's a long-term commitment and that it takes a lot of organization to really make big strides. So the advice I would give is do strategy and action in parallel. We see a lot of companies who have a strategy but are unsure on how to implement it, and we see companies that want to get action but don't have a clear strategy. So I would say always do the two in parallel if you want to get maximum impact and really accelerate your journey.
A balanced diet is important at any age, but as we age, it can help to be more mindful of including certain nutrients in your diet. By your late teens, early 20s, you have up to 90% of peak bone mass, and calcium can help keep your bones healthy. Good sources of calcium are low-fat yogurt, kale, and broccoli. In your 30s and 40s, start thinking about adding more fiber to your diet. Soluble fiber helps lower cholesterol and regulates blood sugar. Now for adults 50 and older, focus on healthy fats. One study says replacing bad saturated trans fats with healthy unsaturated fats is linked with a 27% lower risk of dying. You can find unsaturated fats in seeds, nuts, avocados, and fatty fish like salmon.
No matter where you are in the world, there is a clear pattern on how governments and leaders use the power in their hands.
Will this change Europe? Demonstrations erupted over unemployment. There could be some very serious national security questions.
Living and working in the US right now gives me an important perspective as an outsider looking in. I'm Robin Kerno in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
Have you been bitten by the bug of curiosity? This is CNN 10. My name is Carl Azuz. I'll be your explainer-in-chief.
Global news.
International relations are the key factors.
Relevant stories.
Everyday people whose action is changing their community.
Complex issues explained.
We're going back to the future.
And 10-second trivia.
You get a perfect 10 out of 10.
All in 10 minutes. Stream at cnn.com/CNN10.
This was President Biden moments ago in Warsaw, Poland.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
CNN's Phil Mattingly is with me now. Phil, the White House is clarifying that statement from the president. You and I were talking about this at the top of the hour. wasn't exactly clear at the time whether or not the president was officially calling for regime change in Russia. There's obviously a diplomatic distinction. The Secretary of State was asked about this earlier this week and said that was not the administration's policy. And now the White House is saying that was not exactly what the president was saying. And there's President Biden leaving Warsaw, Poland right now. He's heading into Air Force One at this very moment. Phil, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there. What's the latest?
Yeah, there is now a little bit of clarity or clarifying going on with that statement from President Biden, which, as we discussed, was very striking because the administration from the Secretary of State on down have been very, very clear. They are not calling for regime change. They've never called for regime change. Sounded like the president was, or at least implicitly, calling for it. Not so, according to a White House official who says, quote, the White House, or the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbors in the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. Just a reminder, the president's comment was, for God's sake, this man can't remain in power. So a little bit of a cleanup and a walk back there with what appeared to be, Jim, a rift line on an otherwise very powerful speech delivered by the president, which with a much broader message about the urgency and the stakes of the moment. The president clearly laying out the stakes and seemingly going further than his administration ever had when it came to President Putin himself. The White House trying to make clear in the aftermath, or making very clear in the aftermath, he was not, in fact, calling for regime change, Jim.
I mean, it sounds like, the president would like to see Vladimir Putin leave the scene. I mean, that is not an unpopular opinion that was expressed in that speech. But I guess the distinction would be whether or not the United States would, through some sort of effort on the part of the American government, try to see Vladimir Putin's removal from power in some way, shape, or form. And that is what the White House is clarifying. It doesn't take away the notion that President Biden wanted to get across, that Putin, as he was saying in that speech, is not only a liar and a butcher and so on, but he does not belong in power anymore in the Kremlin.
Yeah, look, I think it is very fair to say that the president's view of President Putin, which has never been high or positive, but has certainly grown darker and more caustic over the course of the last several weeks, is pretty clear. And I think the administration's is as well. I think what the administration has been very careful to do, and you've seen it in the types of weapons that they've been willing to transfer and those that they haven't, the way that they've approached diplomatic efforts over the course of the last several months, is not ramp things up to a degree where they can't be de-escalated. And certainly calling for regime change would be a new level of escalation, and that, according to this White House official, was not what the president was trying to do.
All right, Phil Mattingly, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Up next, we go to the Ukrainian capital and the reaction there to President Biden's speech. You are live in the CNN newsroom.
There are not nearly enough women in STEM and in the construction trades, and I am determined to change that for the next generation. I'm Emily Pillaton Lamb. When I started working in architectural offices and on construction sites, I was almost always the only woman in the room. This is not just a problem of underrepresentation, it's also a problem of who gets to be a part of building the world. Girls Garage is a design and construction school here in Berkeley, California, for girls and gender-expansive youth ages 9 to 18. We teach building skills and technical skills in STEM fields. We build a sort of fortitude for young people to go forth into these careers. This is a superhero team. We all have an average of more than 10 years of experience in our fields. That means that every young person who enters into the space can see someone who has lived a life like theirs and feel confident to know that there's a path that has been forged that they are invited to join. It's my hope that going forth into the future, that being a woman is not the exception, it's actually a necessary part of this workforce.
I think everyone's equal in this world. We all are builders. We can build anything.
There were those who said it was a dream. And yet independence made the dream come true. Today in the biggest delta on Earth, one of the fastest growing GDPs is a reality. Because here, medicine, food, and garments for the world are made. For the year of the Golden Jubilee celebration of independence, the dream has never been more real, because dreams are made in Bangladesh.
doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets. It takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
It's so great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest.
I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them?
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move, very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the scene that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter. This is what Captain Wales has been flying. Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest.
We continue to monitor the government in crisis.
This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed.
That's what it's all about. Max Foster, CNN.
We live in such a fast-paced world where the news has been so relentless. Historic events have happened one after the other. I think that you need that daily appointment with viewers around the world to try and sort through the news of the day. What's important? Why does it matter to me? How do I put it all in context? We follow the news as it happens and where it happens. And then we also take a step back to walk the viewer through the day's news. That is the mission of Hala Garani tonight.
The world's biggest business stories in one place. Expert analysis from every corner of the globe. Marketplace, Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East. With CNNBusiness.com.
Once in a generation opportunity.
Technology, innovation, business.
For World Sport, I'm Amanda Davis, and this is CNN.
Our mission here at CNN, the news comes first. You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts. It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
President Biden just wrapped up a major speech in Warsaw, Poland, across the border from where missiles struck in Lviv. President Biden said Putin cannot remain in power. The White House now looking to clarify those remarks. I want to go now to CNN's Fred Pleitgen, who is in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. Fred, the White House being careful to say now that the president was not, in fact, calling for regime change, which, as you know, covering these kinds of conflicts for so many years, that can take on much larger implications when the American government is calling for regime change in another country. But at the same time,